Good morning to you, and thank you so much for finding time to being with us today. Here are the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa and elsewhere in the world. We start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Standard newspaper, I was paid 40 million Kenya shillings because I'm smart. The mystery surrounding the rushed 6 billion Kenya shillings payment for a UK company by the Treasury for control of Telecom Kenya just days before last year's polls deepens as President Uhuru Kenyatta's ally, John Ngume, reveals that the venture capital firm was willing to take partial payments. That story is on page 4. And shock for drivers in tough rules to protect students. That we have then Ruto Raila MPs close ranks on this bipartisan talks, and ministry freezes projects and inside the crisis in Sudan. And it is Kipruto versus Bekele at London race. The Daily Nation, cheap unga puzzle, and then tough new rules to boost safety in schools. The Star newspaper, truce, Ruto and Raila brigades agree to talks. The issue of inclusion of members of Parliament Canaan in panel remains unresolved. And the main pictorial there is the KDF repels Eastern DRC rebels. Peace, a priceless treasure. That is what we have there, the KDF. That is the Kenya Defense Forces in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and that is the main pictorial on the Star newspaper. Azimio Kenya Kwanza clash over county cash. Kianda founder Angels fell in love with Kenya, and pathologist in Malindi asked bodies to be exhumed. Okay. The Business Daily, Treasury cash data fails to reveal a broke government. That is interesting. And then the People Daily, hope as Ruto Raila teams begin talks. Taifa Leo, Uhuru Kimya, Ruto akitikisa. Jubilee, hicho Kiswahili. I'll leave it right there and move on to other newspaper making headlines from elsewhere in the continent. Okay. So we start with hold on, just a moment. The Daily Monitor from Uganda. The evidence against Nandutu, the Director of Public Prosecutions, tables 7 grounds and 21 documents as evidence to pin State Minister for Karamoja Affairs Agnes Nandutu, who becomes the first minister to be committed to trial over mismanagement of iron sheets meant for Karamoja sub-region. And government suspends teachers' transfers for payroll audit. Attorney General advises Museveni on anti-gay bail. And doctor reveals how Muhakanizi battled cancer of the bone. That is what you get there on the Daily Monitor. Also just up there, heavy fighting in Sudan blocks Uganda's rescue, and Ugandan scientist develops cancer detection machine. That is quite a science breakthrough there, I suppose. All right, so we move on to another leading newspaper, that is the New Vision, also from Uganda. Iron sheets Nandutu to spend 14 days at Luzira Plus. Museveni lifts Kaihura travel ban. Extension workers' salary postponed. And Nasur, the former ruthless Kampala governor, dies. And the Namibian, Shangula wants more control over tenders, and Fulbright confirms Matthews links to Namco deal. The Namibian Sun, we need middlemen, Shangula. Okay. And mother of 10 pleads for assistance, and Itula won't stand for parliament seat in 2024. The Herald from Zimbabwe, committee to tackle drug abuse set up. Politburo endorses final list of candidates. That is all in Zimbabwe. The Daily News, dialogue remains best way forward. Former vice president says won't return to active politics, and female politicians blast sexual abuse. The Guardian from Nigeria, 40 days to go. FEC approves over 100 billion naira contracts, and athletes officials panic as National Stadium Lagos floodlights collapses, and crack widens in APC over alleged misuse of 30 billion naira zoning concerns. All right, and then the Nation as well from Nigeria. Why Buhari didn't or did not intervene in Adamawa polls crisis by government. The Daily News, TR announces major reforms. This is from Tanzania, by the way. Announces major reforms, and then government plans to evacuate Tanzanians living in Sudan. Publicize annual performance reports, public entities told. The Citizen from Tanzania as well. Moody's gives Tanzania favorable credit rating, and then minister allays fears over safety of Tanzanians in conflict-hit Sudan. Government must have lost one there, but I think we are done. Let's just move on to the other news headlines from the UK. And the Daily Telegraph, Russian spy ships threaten to sabotage UK energy supply. And then the Independent, Harris wounded hero Marine, don't deport pilot who fought with UK forces to Rwanda. Commando, who lost 2 limbs in Afghan war, says he helped us. We must help him settle here. Okay, I guess they want Harry to go settle in, I don't know. Anyway, the Times from the UK, judges lose power to block migrant flights. So I guess that will happen. And how to get the best table in restaurants, I guess. As long as you're not sitting near the washrooms, I think you're fine. The Daily Express, we must unite to protect women's rights. That is what we have on the front page. The Financial Times, inflation stuck in double digits offers little hope for end on living cost crisis. And then credit sues SoftBank to recover $440 million US dollars of losses in Green Seal collapse. And the Daily Mail, rapist who proves Starmer really is softy on crime. And then coronation snub and an apology for Queen's bridesmaid. And the iNews, UK faces 5% interest rates after failing to tame inflation. And then let's look at some papers from the US. The New York Post, Biden lied. Border still open, migrants being waved right in. Shelter beds at 130% capacity, and it's only getting worse. Mayor Adams, the president has failed this city. There you go. The Guardian, this is the US version. Stand your ground. The US laws linked to rising deaths and racist violence. And then the Washington Post, 11th hour mediator averted Fox trial. Canada leaves allies uneasy. On bench, judge quietly sought prosecutor post. And then assisted living homes closing the door on some Medicaid seniors, and other news headlines. Then the New York Times, justice delay case on abortion, and then a 3-way nuclear rivalry upends U.S. strategy. India grows with a goal, take on China's economy, and then social media as we knew it is long gone, and guarding for war. Rival generals talked of peace. That is, I think, in relation to what is going on in Sudan. The USA Today, catalyst for so much of the pain, sadness. Mom seeks answers, says rape led to daughter's death. Religion in workplace put to a new test, and shootings reignite defense debate. The Wall Street Journal, lull in deal making crimps earnings at Wall Street banks. And then Russia stifles dissent with treason charges. And world richest person tests his children as successors. And then price cuts at Tesla lead to 24% drop in profit. So that is what we have in some of the newspapers there from we started with those from Kenya, we went to some from Africa, and then we looked at some from the UK and others from the from the US. Before we get into a detailed news bulletin, some of the trending stories or leading stories that I'd like to bring to our attention, and an update on the ongoing situation in Sudan. Let's look at the weather conditions in a few capitals across the continent of Africa, shall we? We start with Johannesburg. Today, Johannesburg is expected to be mostly sunny with highs of 23 degrees Celsius and lows of 11 degrees Celsius. It's going to be partly cloudy in Nairobi with highs of 27 degrees Celsius and lows of 17 degrees Celsius. And in Accra, Ghana, highs of 32 degrees Celsius is expected and lows of 26 degrees Celsius. And it's going to be also partly cloudy there. In Accra, in Abuja, highs of 37 degrees Celsius, going to be really hot, and lows of 25 degrees Celsius, but it's also going to be partly cloudy there. And in Dakar, Senegal, highs of 23 degrees Celsius and lows of 19 degrees Celsius, and it's also going to be partly cloudy. So the only city out of the 5 that I've mentioned there is only Johannesburg that is going to be mostly sunny. And so let's see, in Kinshasa, it's going to be mostly cloudy with highs of 31 degrees Celsius and lows of 23 degrees Celsius. Luanda, that is the capital of Angola, highs of 29 degrees Celsius and lows of 26 degrees Celsius, and it's also going to be mostly cloudy. And in Khartoum, it's very sunny there, despite of everything else that is going on, with highs of 39 degrees Celsius and lows of 24 degrees Celsius. So, and then Addis Ababa, partly cloudy with highs of 23 degrees Celsius and lows of 13 degrees Celsius. So from this weather pattern here, it is clear that perhaps because of the partly cloudy or very cloudy conditions there, most parts of Africa perhaps are experiencing rain, or just a bit of it, like we have been experiencing here from Nairobi. So that is your update, your weather update, and also the newspaper headlines. So I believe you're now up to date. We shall not do sports this morning. So let's just move on to the news. And Sudan's military and its paramilitary rival each have announced that they will abide by a 24-hour ceasefire starting Wednesday evening after a previous attempt at a truce failed a day earlier. A similar pause on Tuesday night fell apart almost immediately. It was not clear if the new attempt would hold. Early on Wednesday, Al Taif neighborhood near Khartoum International Airport, dark plumes of smoke drifted across the sky as the army and the paramilitary RSF faced each other for a 5th day. North of the capital, the Sudanese armed forces reportedly regained control of the Maroe air base after the the rival Rapid Response Forces claimed control. It is the Saudi-owned Al Arabiya TV that aired footage from the Meroe Air Base showing damages in the control tower, terminals, hangars, and fire engines. The UN says at least 296 people have been killed since Saturday, but the toll is likely higher since many bodies have been left in the streets unreachable because of the clashes. With no sign of respite on the eve of the Eid al-Fitr celebrations, Sudanese citizens who have been trapped inside for days by the violence share among neighbors. Some Khartoum residents have begun fleeing. Reports have it that Uganda's foreign ministry is seeking to evacuate students, workers and travelers from Sudan. Japan announced on Wednesday that it was preparing to evacuate its nationals to Sudan, becoming the first country to take such a step in the country where violence has lasted since Saturday despite the calls for a truce. We head over to the Central African Republic, and authorities in the CAR alleged on Wednesday that a leading rebel group was behind the murder of 9 Chinese gold miners last month, despite denials by the insurgents. The rebels blamed the Russian paramilitary group Wagner, hired to protect the several lucrative gold and diamond mines operated by Russian firms in the country, for the attack. Justice Minister Anud Jobai Abazini said the killers were indisputably elements from the CPC, the Coalition of Patriots for Change, quoting a final report from an inquiry into the March 19th deaths. The CPC, an alliance of rebel groups formed in December 2020 to overthrow President Faustina Archange Touadera, has denied any involvement in what it has called a despicable and barbaric act. It has not provided evidence for its claims that Wagner mercenaries were involved in the murders, but the Justice Minister also declined to provide details from the report, accusing the rebels and journalists were not allowed to ask questions during his press conference. Now, hundreds of Wagner paramilitaries were deployed to the Central African Republic in 2018, and their numbers increased in 2020 to fend off an assault on the capital by the CPC. The 9 miners had been employed by the China's Gold Coast Group at the Chimbolo mine, 25 kilometers from Bambari, the main town in Uka prefecture. Abazini told the press conference the president thanked our Russian allies who managed to neutralize certain perpetrators, seized evidence and put to flight the rest of these criminals. Two Chinese officials deployed by Beijing also appeared at the press conference through Abazin, although Abazin declined to identify them. The acknowledgement that they had not visited the scene of the attack 400 kilometers east of Bangui. Okay? They acknowledged. Okay. Now, China's President Xi Jinping had issued, after the killings, important instructions demanding an all-out effort to treat the wounded, handle the aftermath in a timely manner, severely punish perpetrators in accordance with the law, and ensure that the safety of every Chinese citizen in the Central African Republic. 2 people were seriously wounded, China added. Now, the Central African Republic, one of the world's most poorest countries, has been in the throes of civil conflict since 2013 when a Muslim-majority rebel coalition, the Seleka, ousted President Francois Bozize. Militias hold sway over large tracts of territory and often clash over access to minerals and other resources. Although Russia and Chinese companies dominate mining for gold and diamonds in the Bambari region, civilians are often victims of the conflict, with the United Nations and the international aid groups accusing all sides of carrying out war crimes and crimes against humanity. Since their arrival, the Wagner mercenaries have helped push back most of the rebels to their home territories, allowing Central Africa security forces to retake control of several cities and mining operations. Bangui is also thought to have given Wagner and associated companies contracts to operate several mines. Rebel groups have since adopted guerrilla strategies for targeting Central African Republic soldiers and their Russian allies. And the latest from the U.S. in regards to the situation in Sudan, the United States Department has established a special task force to deal with the crisis in Sudan, a spokesperson confirmed on Wednesday. The spokesperson said the State Department has established a Sudan military conflict task force to oversee the department's planning, management and logistics related to the events in Sudan. The spokesperson was speaking to VOA and is quoted as saying the United States condemns the strongest terms of violence between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces. The ongoing fighting between SAF and RSF threatens the security and safety of Sudan's civilians and undermines efforts to restore Sudan's democratic transition. Fighting in Khartoum broke out on Saturday between members of the Sudanese armed forces and paramilitary rapid support forces and has since spread further into the country, reportedly leaving hundreds of people dead and injured. The leaders of the rival groups is SAF head General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and RSF Chief General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, popularly known as Hemedi, joined forces to mount a 2021 coup and return the country to military rule. The two men have since turned on each other amid squabbles over power sharing in the new government. State Department officials said late Tuesday they are unaware of the death or injury of any U.S. citizens in Sudan at this time. The U.S. Embassy in Khartoum security alert of April 18th stated that because of the uncertainty of the security situation in Khartoum and the closure of the airport, there are no plans for the U.S. government coordinated evacuation of private U.S. citizens. It said travel alerts and Sudan's travel advisory will be updated as the situation evolves. The satellite. No, sorry. And that is that on that. The State Department says the U.S. Embassy is continuing to closely monitor the situation in Khartoum and surrounding areas where there is ongoing fighting, gunfire, and security force activity. It says U.S. citizens also are being advised to remain sheltered in place, to attempt to stay at the lower levels of their location and remain away from windows or attempt to keep away from the roadways, to monitor local media updates and review State Department travel advisory on Sudan. The State Department says Americans in Sudan should enroll in Smart Traveler Enrollment Program to receive security alerts and email if they need assistance. All routine consular services at the U.S. Embassy in Khartoum have been suspended at this time, given the unsafe environment. The embassy is providing only emergency consular services as the security situation in Sudan permits. The State Department says it will always seek to provide consular services wherever possible, but the perilous security situation in Khartoum severely impacts its ability to perform that work currently. And I'll just get back to that story shortly, but let's head over first to Cameroon. And officials in the country's northern border with Nigeria say Boko Haram militants in the past week destroyed hundreds of homes in large-scale attacks that killed at least 6 villagers and 2 soldiers and left thousands homeless. Cameroon's government says troops retaliated on Wednesday morning and killed at least 12 militants. Officials in Cameroon's Mayo Moscoto district on the border with Nigeria's Borno state say hundreds of Boko Haram fighters launched deadly attacks on villages over the past 5 days. Cameroon's military says 6 civilians and 2 government troops were killed in the attacks, and the militants stole 2 military jeeps and some ammunition. Gojo Salomon's, Cameroon's official in charge of the agriculture in Mayo Moscoto, while speaking to the media, he said the militants looted markets, ranches, farms and shops and sent villagers fleeing for safety. He also said that thousands of civilians are hiding in the bush on the border with Nigeria and neighboring towns including Mokolo, Moskuta and Koza. He says on Monday the militants destroyed close to 400 shops and houses. Right, and that is the latest news from across the continent of Africa. Very brief. I did not pick on everything else because we will have also another news brief later on at 3 p.m. So by the time these militants are able to destroy a whole 400 shops and kill this many people and all that, in an area that already the government of Cameroon knows that it's quite susceptible to these attacks because of its proximity with that the border with Nigeria and these other places that we've seen an increase in militancy and extremism, but the government still does not beef up its security there. I just fail to understand why we cannot be some of these governments cannot really be find solutions fast or beef up or not be very reactive instead. Re-strategize. You already know this area close to Nigerian border where there is an increase in Boko Haram activities, which has rolled over into this part of Cameroon, but you still just sit there hoping that they will not come and attack and they will not. I mean, surely we have the issue of security in Africa and ensuring our people are safe. I think some of these governments joke a lot, and it's unfortunate to see these kinds of stories and these kinds of news items coming up every now and then in the same places, the same people getting affected, and yet the government has not learned anything yet, has not have a different strategy in place, has not changed tact, has not done anything to ensure that, as much as that is a challenge, but they're also responding in a way that ensures, one, there is the casualties are minimized and just people can really enjoy security provided for by their governments. So Cameroon and Nigeria especially, I think, have really failed the governments. They have really failed their people in this regard. It's just yesterday here I was reading to you this news from Nigeria. I think there are people who were murdered over the weekend. And when you hear the amount of people, the number of people who were murdered, and these places have seen repeated attacks, and the fact that this keeps happening and nothing is changing, I think it can be quite disheartening. And we can only hope that something is done to ensure the safety of the people there. Okay, fine. Let's leave that alone and move on to this statement by the U.S. now. It's interesting that the U.S., over there in North America, so many kilometers away from Sudan, will think it very important for it to form a task force, particularly to look into this crisis in Sudan. When I was bringing you a bit of a history between Dagalo, who is the leader of RSF, and the military leader in Sudan, the official military leader, Al-Burhan, who is like the current, he's the leader now of Sudan, really. He's not a president, but he is the leader of Sudan. I don't know what title I can use, but you know, Sudan has been working towards its transition, so they've been stuck there in a never opening ending, like they're just there, and they're not willing to move forward and really see this transition going. So now see they're fighting each other. But the fact that the U.S. of all this conflict that is happening, they did not even form a task force to look into the conflict in Ethiopia. And they do have great interest in Ethiopia. They haven't formed a task force to look at the conflict in Somalia. And they do have their forces, and they've been trying to help there in Somalia, but it is not in the level where the US can form a task force. They have not formed a task force for which other country, any conflict, because we have numerous conflicts across the continent of Africa. But the US, because of the amount of interest and vested interest that it feels its interest is being threatened in Sudan, and what this conflict could mean to its interest, and the side of the proxy war that we know is also part of the contributing factors to this conflict in Sudan. To let you know how important this is, the US has decided to form a task force, a special task force, as a matter of fact, and that is according to the US State Department, to look into the crisis of Sudan. And you wonder, Sudan seated in the eastern part of Africa, over here. And the US, somewhere so many kilometers, you go through oceans to get where the US is, and run through countries, through a whole continent, before you get to where the US is. But the issues of Sudan are so important to them. So you cannot outright the interest that the US has in Sudan. And the other day, while I was giving you this history of these two generals, feuding generals, I think towards the end of the show, I brought to you the, let me see if I can find it. I pointed out the issue of the US and its interest in Sudan, and a warning that it had given Sudan a couple of years ago if it went ahead to allow Russia to build that base in Sudan. The US was not happy with that. And so just in February, you know, Russia and Sudan wanted to look at how this agreement that was signed in 2017 when President Omar al-Bashir was still in power, and see how they could, how they could sort this out and make this a reality, and have Russia continue with its interest of building this base in Sudan. I'm just trying to get that so that I can just have us understand why. And this was a news item. This was a news item in February on the AFP news site. So let me just, because I think this is important. Oh yeah, it's here actually. So February 11th, 2023, Sudan's ruling military concludes a review of an agreement with Russia to build a navy base on the Red Sea in the African country, two Sudanese officials said. Now, they say the deal was awaiting the formation of a civilian government and a legislative body to be ratified before it takes effect. The officials said Moscow met Sudan's most recent demands, including providing more weapons and equipment. So part of that agreement for Russia to come and finish building this base on the Red Sea was, part of the deal was for Moscow to provide Sudan with more weapons and equipment, okay? The officials did not provide further details and spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal deliberations. A spokesperson for the Sudanese military declined to comment. And the second in command, the leader of RSF, Hamdan Dagalo, is very close to, he's had a really good working relations with the Russians. Matter of fact, is it not yesterday here that I was reading to your statement that the Wagner mercenary group from Russia has refuted claims that it is supporting the RSF in this current conflict in Sudan. So, because there had been some allegations that there's a possibility that it is also involved in this, but it came out yesterday, no, on Tuesday, and said it is not involved in any way in this chaos and this conflict in Sudan. So I don't know whether we need to take their word, because they've never agreed to anything anyway, and their involvement and their relationship in these other countries across Africa, they they never really come outrightly and agree to certain things. But anyway, so this was the latest news. Just a few days before this war broke out. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because last year in September, let me see if I can get that for us so that we're able to tie these things together. You understand what a proxy war, what kind of a proxy war is going on in Sudan, and why it is important for us to open our understanding on what is really going on in Sudan. It might be disguised as just two, military men fighting for control and jostling for power, but really it's really more than that. There are other forces that are driving this conflict, and a lot of this now is quite external. So last year in September the 28th, this news item said that the U.S. ambassador to Sudan has warned of consequences if the northeastern African country allows the establishment of a Russian military base on the Red Sea. So this was last year, and the U.S. was threatening Sudan and saying, if you go ahead and agree for Russia to have this military base in your country, then you have to be prepared for consequences. Now, in an interview with the Taya newspaper, John Godfrey, who is the U.S. ambassador to Sudan, said there are some reports that Russia is trying to implement the agreement it signed with ousted President Omar al-Bashir 2017 to establish a military base along the Red Sea. Now, just go back to events that even led to the ousting of Omar al-Bashir, for you to know it was not just about water and inflation and high prices in Sudan. Do you see how those interests are now tying all the way back? There were countries, I know, country like Saudi and these other ones were greatly in the middle of the ousting of former President Omar al-Bashir. But now when you listen to such sentiments, are you not able to look back and perhaps look at things differently? So they're saying, they're trying, US hard, that Sudan is trying to revive this agreement, to implement this agreement that was signed with ousted President Omar al-Bashir in 2017 to establish a military base along the Red Sea. He warned that such a move will isolate Sudan from the international community and undermine the country's interest. Why? If Sudan has agreed to enter into a bilateral relationship with Russia or any other country, why is it USA's interest? Why would this mean that Sudan will be, isolated from the international community and undermine the country's interest? Okay, so he went ahead to say that all countries have a sovereign right to decide which other countries to partner with, but these choices have consequences, of course. That is what he said. That was the ambassador to Sudan last year. He added that the US can be a good partner, but that will be possible by the creation of a new civilian-led government and a transitional framework that will take the country back to the path of democracy. During a visit to Moscow in November 2017 by President Bashir, who was overthrown in 2019 by a military coup, the two countries signed cooperation agreements on military training, experience sharing, and the entry of warships into the ports of the two countries. Now they're going to bring warships near us here. And according to Russia today, Russian President Vladimir Putin on November 16, 2020, approved the establishment of a Russian naval base in Sudan capable of accommodating nuclear-powered vessels. Do you understand? Now, Sudanese Army Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Mohammed Osman al-Hussein said in a statement 3 days later that there is a full agreement. There is no full agreement with Russia. This is Sudanese Army. There is no full agreement with Russia on the establishment of a naval base in the Red Sea, but our military cooperation has been extended. And on December 9th, 2020, that statement he made in November 2020, and in December of the same year, 2020, Russian media published the text of the agreement between Russia and Sudan on the establishment of a supply and maintained base for the Russian Navy along the sea. So this all happened on 2020, and then this news item from 2022, where the U.S. was warning of consequences should Sudan decide to host this Russian military base. And then in February, while they were trying to revive this, few days later, now you see what is happening in Sudan. So I was just bringing up all this to take us back to this new item, why the US will find it necessary to establish a special task force to deal with the crisis in Sudan. Sudan matters to the US. Sudan matters in the bigger scheme of things, and the proxy war and the jostling of power and the power struggles that we see in the international system between the US, Russia, China, and these other countries. And now anywhere any one of them feels their interest is being undermined, they can do anything. They can do anything. They can sponsor militants, they can sponsor chaos, they can sponsor conflict so that they are able to, because to them, the end justifies the means. That is what Machiavelli, that is what Machiavelli advised to anybody who seeks to rule, that nothing else matters. He was a realist. It does not matter how you get there. It does not matter what you have to do to secure your interest. It does not matter. The end justifies the means. At the end of the day, if you feel like your country and your interest and your foreign policy has been served, anything else doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many people have to die along your ambitions. It doesn't matter how many countries have to come down and the disruption that you have to cause. Look at Libya. Look at Iraq. Look at all other places that we've seen these kinds of things happen. And, tell me what has remained of these countries. So that is how, states operate. And this advises and shows us why states do what they do and how they act. At the end of the day, it is their own interest. And this chaos in Sudan, as long as there are other factors like the ICC and there are other factors, then the power struggles is indeed there. And the issue of the RSF and the military not wanting to get integrated with the RSF and all that, those are all factors. But I think these are just symptoms. There are root problems and there are real issues that are pushing and that are causing this conflict. So whatever it is that we're seeing around, these are just a distraction. And as much as they do have a legitimate place in fueling this conflict, but we should look deeper and see what is really at play in Sudan. Why is it so important for the US to form a task force to deal with the crisis in Sudan if the US did not have that much of an interest? I mean, Kenya, we had a crisis here. And we are a very important partner to the US. But I never heard the US forming a task force to look into the crisis in Kenya. I never heard that. In 2007, 2008, we went wild and crazy and we murdered and did stuff. But it was not to the magnitude that the US could form a task force to come here, although it was, it was very vocal and all that, but not to that extent. Because perhaps the interest it has in Kenya is not as much as those compared to the one it has in Sudan. Sudan is a very important country for the US right now, strategically and otherwise. And for Sudan to allow Russia to have this much leverage by allowing it to have its military base there will defeat a lot of US's interest and will be counterproductive to the US's agenda. So what is really going on in Sudan? What is going on? What is this task force? It is a special task force, by the way, not just some random thing. It is a very special task force that is meant to look into certain issues. What issues are these? Why is it so important for the US? We should be forming a task force here, because Sudan is just right close to us, and anything that happens in Sudan will spill over here, and we will feel the effect. We will feel the effect. So South Sudan will feel the effect. Ethiopia will feel the effect. They share direct borders with Sudan. They will feel the effect, and other countries. But also, I was reading some place and watching some information about the involvement of Eritrea and Ethiopia in this crisis. So see, but those are allegations. So it is a multifaceted conflict, and they want to make it in a way, if we are not very careful, it will become another Democratic Republic of Congo conflict, a perennial conflict, because I think their strategy is, if we can't have it, then no one will. If we cannot benefit from Sudan, if we cannot benefit from the Democratic Republic of Congo, then we will make sure that we cause maximum chaos and conflict so that we keep off the rest of everybody else away, or the rest of us gets to lose. So this is the dangerous war, and this is a very dangerous proxy war that we are seeing unfolding in Sudan. And I am not underestimating other factors that are also contributing to this conflict in Sudan. But it is way deeper than any other thing that we have been talking about. There are driving factors. Everything else is just is just a symptom. But there are root causes of this conflict. And if we're not careful, and IGAD does not handle this very carefully, then we might see another making of Democratic Republic of Congo. Because if you have all these actors and all this interest being represented in one entity, in one country, then it can only turn out not for the good of the people of Sudan. So yeah, so the US has formed a special task force to look into the Sudan crisis. There you go. Okay. Now another proxy war that has been ongoing, and I like the way they're playing out public relations, this thing in the Central African Republic between the Chinese miners who were murdered and the Russian Wagner group mercenaries. It's really interesting. These Chinese miners were murdered. Before we even get to the Chinese miners who were murdered, Russia and China both countries have huge mining sites in Central African Republic. It's all about the minerals and their interests at the end of the day. And we know that because of the history of Central African Republic and the coups and counter-coups that have happened, the current president, Faustin Archange Touadéra, has been very uneasy man, and I think he does not trust his army fully, because some of them have been involved in the previous coups that removed his predecessors, including Bozize. I think I talked about this here a couple of weeks ago. So he decided that to beef up his security, this Wagner, the Russian paramilitary group, will be the best to provide him with personal security. So they offer him, they're part of his secret service, his personal security as the head of state. Can you imagine as a head of state? Can you imagine one day we wake up and we're having a national event in this country called Kenya, this great country called Kenya, and then President Dr. William Ruto, a person who's standing behind him, and those who are offering him, protection from even Britain, okay? He's decided he'll pick some other, not even military, paramilitary, a mercenary group to offer him protection. I cannot even wrap my head around that. So by the time a president gets to that space to lose even confidence from his, and he's the commander-in-chief of a force that he does not even trust. Isn't that amazing? President Faustin Archange Touadéra is the commander-in-chief of the defense forces, or however this thing is said, in the Central African Republic. But these forces that he is the commander-in-chief for, he does not trust them enough. He does not have confidence enough that they can offer him protection as their leader and as the head of state. And I'm laughing, but it is very sad. So he has these Russian mercenaries here protecting him. And of course, they're not protecting him. Of course, Russia is here to get everything they can get from Central African Republic, because that is the exchange. And I was watching another documentary, and apparently this paramilitary who are supposed to even help him fight off these militants, these extremist groups like this CPC, these rebel groups, they're actually working with these people, because these rebel groups also have control over certain mining areas. So they take charge of these mining areas, and they are able to work with this paramilitary, the ones that President Faustin is hoping that will help fight these people, and they're working with them, and they're able to give them the diamonds and whatever it is that they want from this mining. So President Faustin is just a puppet. It's just being played. And even as the resources of Central African Republic keep leaving the country in ways that might not be for the full benefit of the people of the Central African Republic. So Russia and China have been key miners in Central African Republic. So the killing of these 9 Chinese gold miners last month did not sit well with the Chinese government, and it sent a very strong worded letter towards the government of Central African Republic. And the government of Central African Republic is accusing this CPC, and this CPC, the Coalition of Patriots for Change, is the one that is headed by Bozizé. Francois Bozizé, the ones that are a collection of rebel groups that had come together, and they decided that Francois Bozizé was going to be their presidential candidate, I think for the 2020 or 2021 elections, thereabout, but it could not happen because of whatever it is that was going on. Sorry, and I think the Constitutional Court said he could not run because of other issues, so they disqualified him. So the government, without even doing a proper investigation after those 9 Chinese miners were murdered, came to a very quick conclusion that has to be the CPC, and they accused this rebel group. And this rebel group came out and said, come on, we know we're involved in these bad activities and we're destabilizing this government, but we have nothing to do with the killings of these 9 Chinese miners. Matter of fact, we do have some evidence that it is your friends, the Russian mercenary group, that has killed these Chinese miners. So the government has stood its ground, and it gave out a statement. I was reading to you this news item, and I was just laughing through my teeth as I was going through this story, because it is ridiculous. And the Justice Minister, Anud Jubai, held a press conference and said that it is indisputably elements from the CPC, that is the Coalition of Patriots for Change, quoting a final report from an inquiry, because the Chinese gave the government a warning and said, you better look into this and you better do a proper investigation and bring the murderers to book who killed our nationalities. And so Central African Republic government had to look like they're doing something right. Okay, so now after the final report was being presented by this Justice Minister, but the alliance of rebel groups formed in December 2020 to overthrow President Faustin Archange has denied any involvement in what it has called a despicable and barbaric act. So even these rebels think what happened to these Chinese miners is despicable and barbaric. Whatever your friends did, that's what they're telling the government. Whatever the Russian mercenaries did, allegedly, it is despicable and barbaric, and you cannot be accusing us of doing that. We did not do that. And while the government was accusing them, but during this press conference, the government did not provide any evidence for its claim that Wagner mercenary were involved in the murders. So there's no police report, there's no police investigation, there's nothing that points towards a thorough investigation that was done by the government of Central African Republic to indeed establish and give evidence on why they think that this Coalition of Patriots for Change, or CPC, are the ones who carried out these murders. The Justice Minister also declined to provide details from the report, so he did not even give full report, the details. He refused to give the details of the report, accusing the rebels and journalists. Journalists are not allowed to ask questions. So you're just going to present a report that is not even detailed, and you're supposed to just shove information on people's faces, and the people in Central African Republic and the Chinese government are supposed to just accept this to be the truth, even though you can't support your position over who murdered these 9 Chinese miners. So he just read, I think, a bit of that supposed report, but it could not provide a detailed report. It could not provide details from the report and why it was accusing the rebels. And then journalists are not supposed to ask any follow-up questions, any clarifications. Whatever the government was said, that was it. Okay? But the Justice Minister, that sounds like what their last emperor, what is his name? That guy who was calling himself the last emperor of Central African Republic, I've forgotten his name. That sounds like something he could do back then in the 1970s. I've forgotten his name, but it's quite synonym. Anyway, let's move on. Now, hundreds of Wagner paramilitaries have been in Central African Republic since 2018, and the 9 miners had been employed by China's Gold Coast group at the Chimbolo, just 25 kilometers from Bambari, the main town in the Uka prefecture. And this minister told the press conference that President thanked our Russian allies who managed to neutralize certain perpetrators, seized evidence, and put to flight the rest of these criminals. And then, during this press conference, he was having, I guess, one side was the Russian mercenaries, right? The paramilitary group. On the other side were people were supposed to be 2 Chinese officials deployed by Beijing who also appeared at the press conference, although this minister declined to identify them. So he could not say, these officials are from China and these are the positions they hold in the government of China. So he could not even give that information. He was not very clear, because if you're going to write a caption in the newspaper and you're going to say the Justice Minister held a press conference over the report and this investigation that was being done over the killings of these 9 Chinese miners, you also must add that standing with him during that press conference is 2 officials from China, who is this and that, and these are the positions they hold. Like that is part of the requirement when you're having these captions or when you're making news. So it is a requirement, but he could not even say who these people are. But apparently they were officials who had been deployed by Beijing. And China's, okay, I'll not get into what the Chinese President Xi Jinping wrote a couple of weeks ago. But what I'm saying from this story, what I'm reading, I think at this point you don't even know whether to trust the rebels, the CPC, or the government. But judging from how the government has handled this matter, one can quickly come to a conclusion that perhaps CPC could really be right on this. That rebel group could be right on this. And there is a possibility that these Chinese miners might have been murdered by the Russian mercenaries. Okay? There's a high possibility. And because now the stakes are very high for Russia and China in the international system, they don't want to expose any kind of rift or any kind of competition that is ongoing in the Central African Republic. So they would want to just gloss over that and then put up a public relations exercise, show up at a press conference and act as if everything is okay. I think China and Russia knows exactly what happened, and China knows exactly what happened to its citizens, but because maybe the people who conducted these murders are their allies, which is Russia, so they really can't come very strongly. And we've not heard much from the Chinese government in its demands now over after it wrote that letter for, and gave important instructions. Like, how do you instruct a whole government? How does another government instruct another government? Chinese, gave a very important instruction to the government of Central African Republic. So, Central African Republic are subject to China. I don't know. It is crazy, but there's more to it. And they know who murdered these Chinese miners. And there's a high possibility that it's not those rebels, the CPC. Because the government cannot provide evidence that it is the CPC, and the government cannot give a detailed investigative report. So we are left with our curious, wondering minds to make our own conclusions. And that is just what I just made here. So thank you so much. I'll see you later at 3 p.m. for more news across the continent of Africa, and perhaps by then we would have known whether this new truce that was announced in Sudan yesterday, both by Sudan's military and its paramilitary rival, if at all this truce is holding. They had agreed for a new 24-hour ceasefire to allow Sudanese citizens to move across. Eid al-Fitr was it in Friday? So can you imagine? Can you imagine? And this is a very important day for Muslim faithfuls, and you know Sudan is majority a Muslim country, so you can imagine what kind of hardship the people there are going through on top of everything else. So we'll see if at all anything else would have developed up to that time. But I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.